Hello, friends. Today we will discuss a story that still raises many questions. Without further ado, let's get straight to the point. When leading a double life, one can become an easy target for criminals. A headhunter can hide behind even the most innocent and sweet-looking human appearance. In 1994, Miranda Dean was born in the tiny town of North Paul, Alaska, USA. Her mother's name was Elizabeth. The father's name is not reliably known. From the very beginning, the man showed no interest in the child's fate. The girl also had an older sister named Ashley. Both girls were raised by a single mother. From the very beginning, their lives were not easy. At age 2, Miranda was diagnosed with congenital hip dysplasia. Because of this, from an early age, she had to wear a special corrector to be mobile. Naturally, it was difficult for her. The girl was often perceived as an outcast. Her mother Elizabeth was having a hard time. There were problems with work. She couldn't cope with her daughters. Her sister, whose husband's name was Richard, became her support during this period. He was a serviceman and seemed like a decent person. Together they often came to her house and sometimes even looked after the children. Moreover, the man readily offered his help, even in his wife's absence. As it turned out, his initiative had a much darker nature. When Miranda and Ashley turned 5 and 6 years old respectively, Richard raped the girls. The man convinced the children not to tell anyone about what happened. Only after several years did the older daughter find the strength to overcome her fear and tell about the torments. Thus, Elizabeth learned that a close person had been raping her children for years. When she reported to the police and law enforcement officers came to Richard's house for searches, they found a diary in which all the sexual abuse he had tried on the girls was described in detail. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but he was released after 6 years due to good behavior. Additionally, for Richard, this was the first criminal episode in his life, which contributed to his early release. The child rapist was released when Miranda and Ashley turned 9 and 10 years respectively. By this point, they were still differently experiencing and struggling with the consequences of psychological trauma inflicted by the man. When the mother and children learned that the criminal would be released, it was a great shock. Elizabeth decided to move to another city with her children. During this period, things were going very badly for her. There were financial difficulties. The family was effectively subjected to violence from the hands of a close person. All this became a big problem. Almost nothing held them in their hometown. Living near the threat was impossible. The heroine of today's story actively fought against the consequences of psychological trauma. You can help such people if their problem is discovered in time and work begins on it. Perhaps if the heroine of today's story had turned to a specialist in time, severe consequences could have been avoided. Probably, you have already understood that we are talking about psychologists, those professionals who help not only cope with stress and anxiety, but also find a path to self-knowledge and self-confidence. It's nice to see growing interest in mental health. Mental health centers are planned in Russia, which will address various psychological issues. This will be beneficial not only for those who need help, but will also open new employment opportunities for psychologists. The International and Licensed Psychology Institute SMART will help you get quality education. The institute supports its students by providing grants up to 60,000 rubles, which significantly reduces training costs. This approach facilitates the beginning of your path to a new profession. At SMART, training takes place in small groups, where real cases are examined and sessions are conducted with real clients. The format is online. At the same time, the quality of education is not inferior to face-to-face programs. The flexibility of the educational process allows students to conveniently distribute their time. Curator support is available around the clock. Your homework will be checked. You will receive feedback and answers to any questions. It's important to note that SMART guarantees the provision of first clients, and you will start earning just 6 months after starting your studies. These obligations are fixed in the contract. After completing the program, graduates receive not only a Russian diploma of professional retraining, but also an international MBA diploma from the Czech Republic, allowing them to work abroad. The institute also provides a doctoral degree in psychology, which gives the right to conduct scientific activities. SMART is a representative of the All-Russian Professional Psychotherapeutic League and a partner of the Association of Professional Psychologists and Psychotherapists. This is not just confirmation of the high level of teaching, but also additional support through mentoring from experienced professionals. If you want to get a demanded profession, learn from the best in their field, and of course, manage to get a grant up to 60,000 rubles. Then follow the link in the description or scan the QR code you see on the screen. Admissions specialists will contact you and help you choose a suitable course. The single mother hoped to start everything anew, but the move did not help cope with the consequences of inflicted psychological trauma. From age 12, Miranda began to show rebellious behavior. She started spending time with a group of older teenagers who turned out to be troubled, used prohibited substances, constantly drank. We're talking about 15 to 16-year-old teenagers, among whom a 12-year-old girl mixed. To blend in with this peculiar group, she also started doing all this. During this period, she met Forrest. At that time, he was 24 years old, and the guy had a bad reputation. Unfortunately, Miranda seemed to attract such riffraff from an early age. The heroine of the story had managed to become part of a group of teenagers with unconventional interests, thanks to this acquaintance. They called themselves a Satanic group. Most considered them gloomy and dangerous. The schoolgirl didn't spread around that she had become a member of such a group, but clearly joined here thanks to Forrest. The guy persuaded her to perform a certain ritual, after which her soul belonged to him. When Miranda finally told her mother about what happened, Elizabeth tried to cut off all her daughter's contacts with this unhealthy company. Unfortunately, this didn't help. The teenager's behavior only worsened. She began frequently running away from home, became addicted to hard substances. Her school performance significantly deteriorated, as did her relationships with classmates. She became very aggressive and often provoked fights. The situation continued to worsen. Elizabeth herself suffered from similar addictions, and now was reaping the consequences. Unexpectedly during this period, the biological father intervened in the child's life. As far as known, this was the only serious influence he had on the teenager's life. At his insistence, Miranda was placed in a psychiatric clinic, where they helped fight the consequences of received traumas, prescribed medications, and diagnosed her with a mental disorder. Unfortunately, this helped little, according to people who were well acquainted with the troubled family. By age 16, Miranda decided to drop out of school, never received an education, but instead completely immersed herself in wild parties with her unpleasant company. She began a whole series of relationships with much older guys. She became pregnant by one of them. Despite deciding to keep the baby, she didn't even know who the biological father was. Meanwhile, family relationships deteriorated to the extreme point. Ashley couldn't watch how her mother and sister were turning into outcasts. She was forced to leave home, so the rebels' only support disappeared. Elizabeth by this point had also started losing ground, becoming addicted to heavy prohibited substances. It looked very bad. After the first overdose, social services decided to take away the younger daughter Miranda. Thus, the troubled teenager ended up in a new family in the small town of Dan, state of North Carolina. And it was here that she met 20-year-old Elite Barbar. Miranda was 17 at this point. The young man was engaged to a girl who was expecting his child. Her name was Amy. She also turned out to be a 17-year-old schoolgirl. As a result, a peculiar love triangle formed around the 20-year-old guy who had two underage pregnant girls at once. The children were born with an interval of about 1.5 months. Now the company had two newborns to look after. However, none of them was truly mature enough to become a parent. This nearly ended tragically. Several months after the children's birth, Elite's biological daughter was hospitalized with an overdose of sedative medications. The biological father's behavior had always been problematic. From this moment, everything started getting worse and worse. The relationship with his fiancée began to deteriorate. She decided to break up with the inadequate guy, broke off the engagement, and left with the child to another city. Thus, Elite and Miranda ended up together. They became a full-fledged couple, started raising little Aria together. During this period, the heroine of the story willingly talked about her difficult past. That's how Elite learned about the Satanic cult, and was very intrigued by this matter. The couple began regularly discussing this topic. About a year of relationship passed. They decided to leave North Carolina. The families of the young people did not approve of their lifestyle. This escape was necessary to increase the distance between them and avoid constant conflicts, as well as supervision from the older generation. Thus began a series of moves together with little Aria. They couldn't settle anywhere for long. There were difficulties with employment. The final destination was a suburb in Pennsylvania, a small community called Port Trevorton, where at that time only about 400 people lived. The young parents had neither money nor work to settle down. However, as before. But here Elite had a friend, and they went to him. The guy was approximately the same age. He provided the family with a room for joint living during the period while the barbers would get on their feet. However, we're talking about marginal young people. Therefore, finding normal work proved difficult. In fact, they were so antisocial that they couldn't even start a dialogue with a stranger. This also significantly complicated the situation. The couple got married on October 22, 2013. Trying to find a source of income, Miranda decided to offer herself as an escort. However, she emphasized on the Craigslist site that she wasn't going to provide intimate services, but rather was ready to communicate and accompany men at various events. The appearance turned out to be quite sweet, and this was appealing. The girl met with different men and had pleasant conversations for $80 without intimate contacts. It's difficult to say definitively whether she really observed the specified boundaries. Either way, she met a man named Troy LaFerrara, who turned out to be a 42-year-old married man. For the last decades, he had been married, was a decent family man, church member, but simultaneously led a second life. On one hand, he was a respectable member of society, and on the other, a regular client of call girls. Seeing an ad from a new girl, he immediately became interested in this offer. As soon as Troy called Miranda, he immediately offered a different kind of service. Not evening accompaniment as stated, but specifically intimacy. The girl was furious, refused, and pointed out to the man what was written in the profile. Once she cooled down, disturbing thoughts appeared. Miranda and Elite realized they were dealing with quite a wealthy man, as he made a very generous financial offer. Discussing it, the young people realized they could earn money through crime. They had repeatedly morbidly fantasized about murder before. Now they began to perceive it not only as some secret desires, but also as a way to solve their financial difficulties. In general, this topic had attracted Elite and Miranda from the very beginning of their relationship. The couple immediately formed a common interest in the satanic direction, and sacrifices and ritual acts were especially interesting to them. They even used this theme in their role-playing games during intimacy, fantasizing about murders. They poured liquids depicting blood. They weren't planning to murder a specific person. However, they often ended such dialogues with thoughts that sooner or later they would find their victim and learn what it's like to take a human life. When Troy made his generous offer, the young people immediately became activated. Sick sexual fantasies surfaced in their minds. Miranda calmed down after the unpleasant offer and began discussing the situation with Elite. Troy lived in another city. The correspondence was conducted through the internet and could be easily deleted along with the profile deletion. They weren't connected in real life in any way, which made the man a perfect victim for ritual murder. The cutthroats realized they could earn good money and fulfill their long-time dream. After a couple of hours, Miranda agreed to Troy's offer and wrote to the unsuspecting victim. They agreed to meet at a supermarket parking lot on the outskirts of town. The girl would be in her car. Miranda suggested going to a neighboring suburb. Here, according to the temptress, was her summer house that she used for work. Naturally, the girl didn't take initiative into her hands for nothing. Her boyfriend was supposed to be in the back seat of the car and help her bring dark fantasies to life. He was supposed to be disguised with things and blankets. The beginning killers made a plan according to which the heroine of the story would have to say a code phrase, after which Elite would attack the victim. The meeting was set for November 11th, 2013. This date wasn't chosen randomly, as it happened to be the guy's birthday. At the appointed hour, a Honda CR-V was waiting for the man in the shopping center parking lot. He got in, immediately paid the girl the agreed amount. They headed to the neighboring town, just as small and backwoods. Miranda didn't drive to the house they talked about, but went to a secluded place, a quiet, deserted street in the forest belt. Here she stopped and said the code phrase, after which a wire appeared on Troy LaFerrara's throat. Elite strangled him with all his might, but the teenagers didn't calculate their strength. The chosen victim turned out to be quite a sturdy and strong man. He had enough strength to open the door and even pull one leg outside. Elite quickly weakened. Miranda began to get nervous because all this should have been over long ago, but everything wasn't going according to plan. The cutthroats didn't expect such powerful resistance, but worst of all, the criminals saw car lights in the distance in the rearview mirror. She realized they could be caught and took out knives that were prepared in advance for the bloody massacre. Miranda began stabbing the victim about 20 times in the chest, neck, face, stomach. When Troy stopped fighting and showing any signs of life at all, Elite got out of the car, put his leg back inside and closed the door from outside. The guy sat back in the back seat. The car took off. The young people reached another isolated suburban area. Here they took the wallet with money, expensive watch, jewelry, and everything they could find in the pockets except for the mobile phone. Elite insisted that taking it with them wasn't worth it, as they could be tracked by geolocation. The couple threw their victim's body on the roadside and drove away, thinking they had committed the perfect crime. Then, Miranda and Elite drove to the nearest Walmart, where they bought cleaning supplies to clean up the car interior. These were special compounds for seats, mats, and also a set of gloves they intended to work with. The front car interior was covered in blood. It really took them more than an hour to thoroughly clean everything. For this, they drove to another isolated place, where together they actively cleaned the blood. After this, it was decided to celebrate Elite's birthday. They went to a restaurant, and then to a strip club. Of course, they used the money stolen from their victim for this. The young people just continued living normal life as if nothing had happened. The next day, a couple of random witnesses found Troy's body. It wasn't even covered with branches or earth. The man was simply thrown away like unnecessary garbage with 20 stab wounds and strangulation marks on his neck. Naturally, the witnesses immediately called the police. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they found not only the body, but also the electrical cord used to strangle him. The body was identified very quickly, as the mobile phone remained in the pocket through which the owner was traced. The police immediately reviewed the phone call records in the history. It turned out that on November 11th, he only contacted 2 people in one day. The first number was his wife's, and the second turned out to be an unsaved number. After checking it, the police traced it to Miranda. Moreover, all her data was obtained, including place of residence. And the girl immediately interested the investigators. Within minutes after this, the police were already driving towards her house. Here the girl was detained and taken to the station for questioning. From the very beginning, the heroine of the story denied any involvement in the crime, and even knowing Troy. Nevertheless, it was obvious that she was nervous and acting suspiciously. It was enough to ask for the girl's mobile phone for the testimony to start changing. At first, she furiously refused to provide the mobile phone to the police. However, there was no choice. While detectives examined the contents, messages and contacts, Miranda became more and more nervous. Despite this, they couldn't immediately find the needed information. There was nothing to charge the girl with, and she was simply released. When Miranda returned home, what was happening changed something in her. She began pouring her heart out to the first person she met, namely, the friend who had sheltered the couple with the child. She immediately confessed to the murder, but did it so abruptly that it seemed like a bad joke. From the very beginning, the young man tried to convince the criminal that she should return to the police and confess everything. Her husband, Elite, joined the conversation. From the very beginning, he behaved as if he was shocked by this story. Miranda clearly felt remorse. She confessed to the friend that she had stabbed the victim with a knife, but didn't say a word about Elite. The husband never admitted during the entire conversation that he was even present in the car. Even the friend got the feeling that he was manipulating Miranda, trying to impose an even greater sense of guilt on her, which seemed strange. Through leading questions, he led the girl into even more serious anxiety. Instead of taking on even part of the guilt, Elite pretended to be shocked and even started crying. His friend didn't suspect that Elite could be involved in the crime. On the contrary, he believed that Elite wasn't involved. The girl struggled with emotional tension almost all night. Finally, around 4 o'clock in the morning, she gathered her strength, returned to the police station, and told about the murder. But she insisted that it was all self-defense. Now the girl confessed that she had indeed arranged to meet with the man, but not for providing intimate services, rather for evening accompaniment. Troy changed his plans and began insisting that he was ready to pay for sex. When Miranda reported that she was only 16, he was very unhappy. She insisted that the man faced criminal prosecution if she reported to the police. Obviously this was a lie, because by this time she had turned 19 years old. The girl was clearly trying to shift part of the blame onto the victim to justify her evil deed with his harassment. According to her, instead of backing off, Troy began forcing her to intimacy by force. She needed to defend herself. He became aggressive as soon as he realized she wasn't going to have sex with him for money. The girl felt a threat to her life, clearly understood that all this could end tragically. referring to her uncle Richard, who had molested her in preschool age. Of course, Miranda's words sounded implausible, as 20 stab wounds in different parts of the body, while not resembling defensive wounds, hardly resembled an attempt to defend oneself. Besides, the cord used to strangle the man was found. A mark from it remained on his neck. The throat was crushed. In Miranda's words, the wire wasn't mentioned. Something was clearly wrong here, and it seemed a third person was involved. To verify the girl's words, the police began tracking movements before meeting with Troy. It was quite easy to find video footage that was taken in the parking lot just 5 minutes before the scheduled meeting. The recording clearly shows an unknown young man hiding in the car in the back seat. He was also quickly identified as 22-year-old Elite. It was decided to talk to Miranda's newlywed husband. The criminals clearly hadn't thought through the plan, because by this point they didn't even have a unified version. As a result, Elite began telling a version completely different from Miranda's words. The detectives immediately noted that the girl was very emotional, while the boyfriend showed no feelings. He was cold, but surprisingly easily cracked, as if he had long wanted to talk about the committed evil deed. Describing the crime, the guy briefly described the attack itself, but spent much more time on the list of purchases made with the stolen money, including vividly describing the dishes they ate on his birthday. It seemed that killing a person didn't bother him at all against this background. He described the taste of meat he ate after the massacre in such a way that it seemed as if he killed daily. After this, both were arrested and left behind bars until the hearings began. However, by this day, both had retracted their statements and now claimed they were innocent. This was a serious contradiction to the statement that the criminal made in a television program on the eve of the hearings. Several journalists communicated with her. Thus, the pretty girl became a participant in an interview that turned out to be truly viral. According to the heroine of the story, it wasn't the first time she had dealt with a person. She allegedly stopped counting victims after reaching the 22nd murder, in the period from 2008 to 2013. But all this seemed absurd. The family spoke in defense of the girl. Everyone who knew her well insisted that she had lied all her life. The reasons for such actions were always the same. Miranda simply wanted to draw attention to herself, and enjoyed it. Despite this, the criminal insisted that all the murders began when she, as a teenager, became a member of a satanic group, which she was drawn into by a guy named Forrest. Miranda avoided details, didn't even know the names of victims, but persistently called herself a serial killer. She claimed that their company only killed those who committed bad deeds, for which she was nicknamed Dexter. Detectives were forced to verify this information. During communication with the girl, she couldn't remember anything about these episodes, of which, according to her confession, there were many more. Where she lived during this period in Alaska, there weren't even that many missing people. It seemed that all this was obvious lies. Besides, her behavior clearly didn't correspond to an experienced criminal. She even decided to leave the victim's mobile phone right in his pocket, didn't try to hide or destroy it. Although obviously the means of communication would allow tracking down the criminals. The only reason she might not know such things, which experienced criminals know perfectly well, was that Miranda was lying. Troy LaFerrara actually became the first victim. During the investigation, it turned out that 2 other men had responded to Miranda's ad, but they didn't show up and thus saved their lives. However, there were opposite opinions. Psychologists worked a lot with the girl. Some of them were convinced that she had killed people before. Even Elite told his wife a lot, including about all these ritual murders. Listening to these stories was one of his favorite activities during their relationship. The guy remained convinced that Miranda had killed other people. She told about these episodes extensively and eloquently, although she refused to repeat them to journalists, allegedly so that other participants in the murders wouldn't suffer. Elite believed that during such periods a demon possessed his girlfriend. He considered her possessed. The prosecution was sure that this way the criminals were trying to avoid the death penalty due to insanity. All this greatly complicated and delayed the processes. It was necessary to prove or disprove at least some of the numerous claims of the detainees before starting the hearing. By 2016, everything was still undetermined, but other upheavals began. The heroine's mother voluntarily ended her life. She couldn't cope with the pressure from the public, who accused her of raising a monster. By this point, she had been struggling with addictions and mental problems for many years. Close ones believed that the woman simply couldn't cope with them. She didn't leave a suicide note. Therefore, it's not reliably known what contribution to this decision was made by her criminal daughter. Many believed that it was the public pressure because of Miranda that became the last straw. In the same year, the criminal, while in custody, asked for divorce from Elite. The girl continued to assert that she was a victim. From the very day of birth, Miranda was surrounded by manipulators, liars, rapists, and criminals. According to stories from a gang member she belonged to, once the girl told how she was tied to a bed and given a home abortion. This happened when she told her mother she was pregnant and didn't know by whom. Her boyfriend Forrest allegedly forced her into prostitution from age 12. But what of this was true is difficult to say. Despite the fact that she was diagnosed with several disorders in the hospital, it's not reliably known. Whether she ever took medication for attention deficit disorder, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder, which doctors suspected during various periods of examining the girl. Feeling public attention and interest, the pathological liar continued to tell one tall tale after another. Now she remembered the name of Aria's biological father, who according to her was killed in another ritual. Then she began telling that she voluntarily came to the police because she wanted to be arrested to finally stop killing. According to another version, she came to the station so that they would take away her daughter, and thus the child was saved from the marginal existence she led with her husband. The criminals were found guilty, however. At the stage of determining punishment, difficulties arose due to the young age of the attackers. The prosecution fought in vain for the death penalty, but there was no success. Organizations opposing capital punishment made a great contribution to this. As a result, in September 2014, they were sentenced to life imprisonment. Aria was placed under care services. Considering how prominent the scandal was in which her name figured, the girl's surname was changed, and she was given to a foster family. The murder shocked Troy LaFerrara's wife the most, as she had no idea about his double life. But the tragic ending shocked her even more. Thank you all for watching. Very interesting to hear your opinion in the comments. I'm sure we'll have something to discuss. As always, see you in the next videos.